This week we have, I hope, witnessed what happened at the Capitol on Thursday. It was a Wednesday, thank you. I have no idea what day it was. And here are just a couple of images to remind you of what happened. You can picture the angry mob swarming up the Capitol steps, seeking to overturn the election. Perhaps you saw the image of the noose hanging in the halls of the Capitol, or of a person carrying a Confederate flag through the Capitol. Maybe you saw people who were wearing t-shirts that said, 6 million wasn't enough. Or perhaps you heard about the truck parked on the lawn of the Capitol, stuffed with explosives. Or maybe you noticed the rather soft treatment that the people entering the Capitol expected and received. And afterwards, when the Senate gathered back together, Senator Ben Sasse said about these events, "This is not who we are." I have to disagree with the senator. I think it is a part of who we are in this country. It's a part of a long, dark legacy that this country has known since its founding. And here's part of the reason I disagree. Our faith, our Catholic Christian faith, teaches us that social sin and personal sin is real. We believe that domestic terrorism is real and sinful. Extremism, such as white supremacy or scapegoating of minorities or lynching, is real and sinful, but it is a part of our history. And oftentimes we support people who lead from hard hearts and cruel actions. This happens every day in government, it happens in corporations, it happens in schools and families, where we somehow let the bully abuse power, act cruelly, deceive, scapegoat, all in an effort to control things. So the question that we're faced with after what happened this week is, what can we do about this dark strain that plagues our country? What can we do about it as people of faith? Now, I'm pretty sure that none of you were climbing up the walls of the Capitol. Pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that none of you were dropping pipe bombs around the grounds. Davin, I hope you weren't doing that. I'm pretty sure that none of you were parading around with the Confederate flag. But here's the thing. The darkness that fueled these actions, and many others like it, on that day and throughout our history, sometimes influences even the way we act. There are times when we sometimes act from the hardness and hurt in our hearts. I know I do. There are times when we react to others out of fear or an emptiness or a rage or a need to control things. And so we're faced with the same question. What can we do about this in our personal lives, in our society, and in our personal lives? What is the remedy for the hard, cruel hearts that often drive how we behave and treat each other? And I think part of the answer can be found if we turn to the prophet Isaiah, who faced a situation that's actually similar to ours. Here's Isaiah, he's in Jerusalem, and he is watching Israel being divided by violent factions. He's watching the capital being attacked. He can see that hearts have grown hard. There is an indifference among the people, especially towards the poor and the vulnerable. People seem to be ignoring God and not at all acting in God's ways. And Isaiah falls on his knees and begs God to tear open the curtain that divides our realm from the divine realm. He's begging that God tear open that curtain. Tear it open so that the life of heaven will come down, because Isaiah is convinced the only thing that can remedy the hardness of hearts that affects governments and leadership and our relationships is if the very power of heaven pours into our dimension and we get new hearts and new minds so that a new world can be born. And this takes me to today's reading from Mark's Gospel, which is really not about the baptism of Jesus. It's about what happens right after. Jesus steps into the Jordan, John dunks him, and he turns around and as he's stepping out and the water's dripping down his beard, suddenly the veil between our dimension and the heavenly dimension tears open. And the bright, beautiful power and light of heaven pours down onto Jesus and into Jesus. And that tear between our dimension and the heavenly one remains open, permanently open, so that streaming from heaven, there is a permanent power of God coming onto Jesus and available for us. What Mark is saying, using Isaiah's beautiful image, is that what Isaiah hoped for, what all of Israel hoped for, and what our world needs has happened with Jesus. Jesus is the decisive turning point, the remedy to our hard hearts and dark minds, to our violence, to our racism, to our injustice, to our cruelty. A new reality is now possible, a new way of living. Instead of living from hard hearts, we can now live from the very life that energized Jesus. So I want you to just close your eyes for a minute. Go ahead. If you need to fall asleep, that's okay. Close your eyes, and I want you to imagine the risen Lord standing in front of you. And oh, he's tall. He's like 10, 15 feet tall. And watch as the very life and power of heaven, this beautiful bright light, streams from heaven through him. And open your arms out and say, yes, fill me, Lord, with your Spirit. Let's hear you say yes. Yes. Come to me, Lord. Allow that Spirit to pour into your heart and mind, into those empty and hurt places. Feel it come into your relationships, especially those estranged and broken ones. Feel the Lord fill you with his life, those lonely and sad parts, the indifferent parts, the parts that are enslaved. Let that Spirit pour out from him into you so that you become a new person. Now open your eyes. Imagine if Catholics and Christians lived from this. A new world would be possible. A world where truth actually matters. A world where real concern for the weak and the vulnerable, the unborn and the born becomes possible. A world where racial reconciliation and commitment to global health imitate Jesus' ministry of healing and reconciliation. So my friends, to close, let me give you two examples of where I think the power that's coming from heaven through Jesus into our world is actually activating and making new things possible. Here's one example. I noticed right after the events that happened at the Capitol that all kinds of people everywhere started to pick up on how differently the insurrectionists were treated from the way black protesters were treated. They picked up on the difference. There were no military vehicles, no military assault-style weapons. They noticed the difference. It was as if our consciousness was suddenly open to the way that racial injustice leads to different kinds of treatment and unjust treatment. And that awakening of consciousness, even the media noticed it, I think is an instance of the Spirit of God breaking through our hard hearts and minds. Here's another one, a more mundane one. I heard this morning that there was a man standing on his porch, and he was noticing some of these insurrectionists driving out of D.C. past his home, and he kind of blew a stack and started yelling at them and said, "Leave our city, leave our city." And there was a woman, black woman, sitting in her car. And she heard him, and she started applauding him. She goes and buys a bottle of wine, brings it to the guy's house. He invites her in, and they sit down and have a 2-hour conversation. Because they decided to live out of the new hearts and new minds that are possible because God's Spirit is available to us through Christ. And so, my friends, this is the choice we have to make every morning. And here's your homework. Every morning this week when you wake up, I want you to imagine the Lord standing right next to your bed. And I want you to ask Him, "Lord, today, fill me with the bright light that pours out of you. Fill me with that." And make the promise that that day and every day next week, you will live from that and nothing else. And we will become the future that our world needs.